You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't fire every single one of you right now. The words hung in the air of the mahogany boardroom like a death sentence. 5 faces around the polished table went white as sheets. These weren't just any faces. These were the faces of the Pentridge family, the people who had built their fortune on greed, manipulation, and the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened their power. And now, sitting at the head of their own conference table, was the woman they thought they'd destroyed forever. But let me ask you something first. How are you doing today? Where are you watching from? I hope wherever you are, you're somewhere comfortable, because this story is going to take you on a ride that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about justice, revenge, and the power of a woman who refuses to stay down. You know what they say about karma, it doesn't always come when you want it, but it always comes exactly when you need it. Sometimes justice wears a business suit and carries a briefcase full of legal documents that can destroy lives with a single signature. Sometimes the person you underestimate the most becomes the architect of your complete downfall. My name is Amara Swan, and this is the story of how I went from a broken widow thrown out like yesterday's garbage to the woman who bought the company that tried to bury me. This is the story of how I walked back into that boardroom 18 months later, not as the grieving wife begging for scraps, but as the new owner of everything they thought they'd stolen from me. Picture this moment. 5 people who had spent months celebrating my destruction, suddenly realizing that the woman sitting across from them held their entire future in her hands. The same hands they'd forced to pack up a cardboard box. The same hands they'd watched shake as I signed away what I thought was my last connection to my dead husband. But before I tell you how I made them all pay for what they did to me, before I explain how I turned their greed against them and watched their empire crumble, I need you to do something for me. If this story hits you the way I think it will, if you find yourself holding your breath waiting to see how this all plays out, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the underdog wins. Subscribe because, trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. But let me start from the beginning, back when I was young and stupid enough to believe that family meant something. Back when I thought love and loyalty were enough to protect you from the wolves in expensive suits. I was 26 when I married August Pentridge, and I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Not because of his money, though the Pentridge family had plenty of that, but because August saw something in me that no one else ever had. He saw potential. He saw strength. He saw a partner. I believed in fairy tales back then. I believed that if you worked hard enough, if you loved deeply enough, if you gave everything you had to the people around you, they would protect you when you needed it most. I believed that family was about more than blood, that it was about choice, about commitment, about standing together when the world tried to tear you apart. God, I was naive. August and I didn't just fall in love, we built something together. Pentridge Industries wasn't just his family's company when we met. It was struggling, bleeding money, held together by old contracts and older grudges. But August had vision, and I had the business sense to make that vision reality. For 3 years, we worked 18-hour days side by side. I restructured their entire operations division. I negotiated contracts that saved them millions. I implemented systems that turned their chaotic mess of a company into a streamlined machine that actually made money. His family tolerated me because I was useful. His mother, Patricia, would smile that cold smile of hers and tell people how helpful I was. His brother Marcus would pat August on the back and joke about how he'd found himself a little worker bee. His sister Jennifer would make comments about how lucky I was to have married into such an established family. I told myself their coldness didn't matter because August loved me. I told myself that time would warm them up, that eventually they'd see me as more than just an outsider who'd married their way in. I told myself that the work I was doing, the value I was adding, would eventually earn their respect. I was wrong about everything. The first sign should have been how they talked about the business. To them, Pentridge Industries wasn't a company, it was a birthright. It didn't matter that I was the one who'd saved it from bankruptcy. It didn't matter that my strategies had tripled their revenue. It didn't matter that half their biggest clients had signed on because of relationships I'd built. In their minds, I was temporary. I was a phase August was going through. I was someone who could be useful for a while and then discarded when I was no longer needed. 3 weeks before David died, he did something his family still doesn't know about. He transferred complete ownership of the company to me. Not partial ownership. Not shared ownership. Complete, total, legal ownership of every patent, every line of code, every future possibility. He made me promise to keep building what we'd started, to never let his family destroy the vision we'd shared. They'll try to take everything, he whispered from his hospital bed, his hand barely strong enough to squeeze mine. But they can't take your mind, Laura. They can't take what you know how to build. I thought he was being paranoid. I thought grief was making him imagine threats that weren't really there. I was wrong about that too. David died on a Tuesday morning in March, with me holding his hand and his family arguing in the hallway about funeral arrangements. I was 26 years old, 6 months pregnant with our son, and about to discover exactly what the Whitmore family really thought of me. The funeral was a nightmare. Patricia planned everything without consulting me, chose readings that ignored our relationship, and seated me in the 3rd row behind important family friends. The obituary she wrote mentioned David's brief marriage in passing, like I was a footnote in his life story. But the real horror show started after the burial. I came home to the Whitmore mansion, the house where David and I had lived for 2 years, to find Patricia, Richard, and Emma waiting in the living room with a team of lawyers. They had papers spread across the coffee table and expressions that could have frozen hell. "We need to discuss your situation," Patricia said, not even offering me a seat in what had been my own home. That's when they told me their version of my future. The house belonged to the family trust. The cars were in David's name, which meant they reverted to the estate. The bank accounts were frozen pending probate. The company, David's little hobby, would be dissolved since it was clearly not viable without proper family oversight. And me? I could stay in the guest room until after the baby was born, provided I signed papers agreeing that any inheritance claims would be handled appropriately through their lawyers. I sat there, 6 months pregnant and barely 24 hours into widowhood, listening to them dismantle my entire life with the efficiency of people who'd been planning this conversation for months. "Of course, we understand this is difficult," Emma said with fake sympathy dripping from every word. But David wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. The medication, the stress, it's not uncommon for people to make promises they can't keep. That's when I realized they thought David had promised me things he couldn't deliver. They had no idea about the company transfer. They thought they were taking everything from me, but they didn't even know what everything was. I could have told them right then. I could have pulled out the legal documents that proved I owned the company they were so casually dismissing. I could have watched their faces change when they realized their little hobby dismissal was about to cost them everything. But something in their expression stopped me. The satisfaction in Patricia's eyes. The smug certainty in Richard's voice. The way Emma kept glancing at her phone like this was just an inconvenient interruption in her day. They weren't just taking my home and my security. They were enjoying it. So I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I decided to let them think they'd won. "I understand," I said quietly, my hand resting on my pregnant belly. "I'll pack my things." The relief in that room was palpable. They'd been prepared for tears, arguments, legal threats. They hadn't been prepared for quiet acceptance from the gold digger who was finally showing her true colors by giving up so easily. I packed one suitcase with clothes and personal items. I took the laptop where I'd stored years of work on David's company. I took the legal documents they didn't know existed. And I took the promise I'd made to my dying husband. As I walked out of that mansion for the last time, Patricia called after me. "Laura, dear, you should know, we'll be making sure people understand the real situation here." David was vulnerable, and sometimes vulnerable people make poor choices about who they trust. But the family will make sure his reputation isn't damaged by unfortunate associations. She was telling me they plan to destroy my reputation along with everything else. I turned around one last time and looked at the three people who thought they'd just won the lottery by getting rid of me. You're right, I said. David did make a choice about who to trust. I hope you're comfortable with the consequences of that choice. They thought I was talking about trusting them with his legacy. They had no idea I was talking about trusting me with his company. I walked out of that house with nothing but a suitcase, a laptop, and a promise to a dead man. Behind me, the Whitmore family was already planning how to spend money they thought they'd inherited and discussing how to spin the story of David's unfortunate marriage to their social circle. What they didn't know is that they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They'd underestimated a grieving widow who knew how to code. But let me start from the beginning of what happened next, because this is where the real story begins. The one-room apartment I found in Pilsen was a far cry from the Whitmore mansion, but it was mine. For 100 square feet, a Murphy bed that barely worked, and a radiator that clanged like a ghost in chains every night. The deposit took most of my remaining savings, but I needed a place where I could think, plan, and figure out how to honor the promise I'd made to David. My son Philip was born 3 months after I moved in, and holding him for the first time in that tiny hospital room, I made him a promise too. He would never know poverty the way I had growing up. He would never feel powerless the way his mother felt walking out of that mansion. And he would inherit something real from his father, not just money, but a legacy of innovation that could change the world. The Whitmore family sent flowers to the hospital. The card read, "Congratulations on your son. We hope you'll consider what's best for his future." It was signed by Patricia, but I recognized the threat underneath the pleasantries. They were reminding me that they had resources I didn't, connections I couldn't match, and the power to make my life very difficult if I didn't stay in my lane. What they didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this fight since the day I walked out of their house. David's company, officially called Finance Forward, existed only on paper when I inherited it. The technology was solid, revolutionary, even, but David had been too sick in his final months to pursue investors or build partnerships. His family had dismissed it as a hobby, which meant they'd never bothered to understand what they were dismissing. I spent Philip's first weeks of life diving deep into the company's potential. While he slept in a bassinet next to my desk, I refined algorithms, researched market opportunities, and built financial projections that made my heart race with possibility. The platform we designed could serve millions of underbanked Americans, providing services that traditional banks either couldn't or wouldn't offer. But potential doesn't pay rent, and I was burning through my savings faster than I'd anticipated. That's when I met Dr. Sarah Meshach at a new mother support group. Sarah was a venture capitalist who'd taken time off after having her daughter, and she was the first person who looked at my business plan without immediately asking where my husband was or whether I really understood what I was proposing. "This is brilliant," she said, scrolling through my presentation on her tablet while our babies played on the community center floor. "The market analysis alone is worth millions. Who helped you put this together?" "I did it myself," I said, and watched her eyebrows rise. "You have a computer science background?" "Northwestern. I graduated summa cum laude, but most people don't ask about my education. They're usually more interested in discussing my late husband's family." Sarah's expression shifted, and I could see her putting pieces together. "Whitmore. You're David Whitmore's widow. I heard about his death. I'm sorry for your loss. But I also heard." She paused, clearly uncomfortable. "You heard I was a gold digger who married him for money," I finished. "It's okay, you can say it. His family's been very thorough in spreading that story." "Is it true?" The question was direct, without judgment, and I appreciated that more than she could know. "I loved David more than my own life," I said. "But I also helped him build this company from the ground up. Every algorithm, every user interface design, every market strategy, we developed it together. The difference is, I understood the technology and he understood the business side. When he got sick, I kept working on it because I believed in what we were building. Sarah studied me for a long moment. Show me the code. I pulled out my laptop right there in the community center and walked her through the platform's architecture. I explained how our machine learning algorithms could assess creditworthiness for people with limited credit histories, how our user interface made complex financial tools accessible to people with limited education, how our security protocols protected vulnerable users from predatory practices. By the time I finished, Sarah was leaning forward with the intensity of someone who'd just discovered gold. Laura, this isn't just a good idea. This is a game changer. The technology you've built here could disrupt the entire financial services industry. Why aren't you already funded? Because every investor I've approached wants to know where my husband is, or they assume I'm just the pretty face fronting for the real technical team. When I tell them I am the technical team, they start asking about my qualifications in ways they'd never ask a man. Sarah nodded grimly. I've seen it 1,000 times. Brilliant women getting dismissed because people can't imagine that innovation comes in different packages than they expect. She closed my laptop and looked me directly in the eyes. I want to invest. Not just money, I want to be your partner in building this into something that changes everything. For the first time since David's death, I felt hope. Sarah's investment gave me 6 months of runway and access to her network of contacts. More importantly, it gave me credibility. When Sarah Meshach vouched for your technology, people listened. We spent the next few months refining the platform, conducting beta tests with community organizations, and building partnerships with credit unions that served underbanked populations. The results were extraordinary. Our beta users were accessing financial services for the first time in their lives, building credit histories, starting small businesses, sending their kids to college. We weren't just building a company. We were building bridges to economic opportunity for people who'd been systematically excluded. But success brought visibility, and visibility brought attention I wasn't ready for. The first article appeared in TechCrunch 6 months after Sarah's investment. Revolutionary fintech platform emerges from unlikely source, read the headline, and the piece focused heavily on my background as David Whitmore's widow. The reporter had clearly done his homework, interviewing several unnamed sources who questioned whether I really had the technical expertise to build what I was claiming to have built. Fade into obscurity while I built something so revolutionary, so undeniably successful, that no one could question who had created it. I opened my laptop and started researching business incorporation procedures in Delaware. If the Whitmore family wanted to destroy Finance Forward, they could have it. I'd build something better under a different name, with different investors, in a different market. I'd let them think they'd won while I prepared to show them what losing actually looked like. The next morning, the Tribune article was even worse than I'd expected. The headline read, "Tech Widows Claims Questioned by Industry Experts," and the piece included quotes from anonymous sources who painted me as a manipulative opportunist who'd stolen credit for her dead husband's work. But buried in the article was a detail that gave me hope. The reporter had interviewed several actual technology experts who'd reviewed publicly available information about Finance Forward, and their assessment was unanimous. The platform represented sophisticated, innovative work that could only have been created by someone with deep technical expertise. The algorithms underlying Finance Forward's credit assessment system are remarkably sophisticated. One expert was quoted as saying, "This isn't the kind of work you could fake or copy. Whoever built this platform has genuine technical brilliance." The Whitmore family's own smear campaign was inadvertently proving that I had the skills they claimed I lacked. I called David Kim and told him I was rejecting the settlement offer. "Laura, I have to advise against this. They have unlimited resources and a clear strategy for destroying your credibility. Fighting them could result in complete financial ruin." "I'm already financially ruined," I pointed out. "The question is whether I'm going to let them destroy David's legacy along with my bank account. What's your plan?" I'm going to build something so successful that their lives become irrelevant. There was a long pause. That's not a legal strategy, Laura. That's a prayer. Sometimes prayers are all you have. I hung up and called the Whitmore family's lawyer to formally reject their offer. Then I called Sarah to tell her I understood her decision to withdraw support and that I didn't blame her for protecting her other investments. Finally, I called my landlord and negotiated a 2-week extension on the eviction, promising to be out by the end of the month. I had 14 days to figure out how to rebuild my life from nothing. But I also had something the Whitmore family didn't expect, a plan they couldn't see coming, built on technology they didn't understand, targeting a market they'd never considered. While they celebrated their victory over the gold digger who'd finally been put in her place, I was about to disappear into the shadows and build an empire they'd never see coming. The war was far from over. It was just moving to a battlefield where I had every advantage, and they had no idea they were still fighting. The storage unit in Cicero became my office, my laboratory, and my sanctuary. For $300 a month, I had a 10 by 12 concrete box where I could work without interruption, think without judgment, and plan without interference. I'd moved our few belongings into a studio apartment above a laundromat, where the constant hum of washing machines masked the sound of Philip crying and my fingers typing code late into the night. The Whitmore family thought they'd won. The settlement rejection had been reported in the business press as evidence of my unrealistic expectations and refusal to accept responsibility for fraudulent claims. Patricia Whitmore had given an interview to Forbes where she expressed sadness about my inability to move forward constructively and hoped I would eventually find peace with David's actual legacy. They had no idea I was building something that would make Finance Forward look like a prototype. The new platform was called Meridian Financial, and it was everything Finance Forward could have been if I'd had unlimited resources and no family interference. Instead of just serving underbanked Americans, Meridian would provide financial services to underserved populations globally. Instead of simple microloans, it would offer comprehensive financial ecosystems including banking, investment, insurance, and business development tools. But building a global financial platform while living above a laundromat with a toddler required resources I didn't have and connections I couldn't make as the controversial widow everyone was avoiding. That's when I met Elena Vasquez. Elena found me through a coding forum where I'd been contributing solutions to complex algorithmic problems under a pseudonym. She was a former Goldman Sachs executive who'd left Wall Street to build ethical financial technology, and she'd been tracking my forum contributions for months. "Your work on distributed ledger optimization is extraordinary," she said when she called me out of the blue one Tuesday afternoon. "I've been trying to solve similar problems for my own platform, and your solutions are years ahead of anything I've seen in the industry." I was sitting in the storage unit with Philip napping in his car seat, surrounded by whiteboards covered in code and financial models. "Thank you. Are you working on something in the fintech space?" "I'm building a platform for international remittances, but I keep running into scalability issues with transaction processing. Your forum posts suggest you've solved problems that have been stumping teams of PhD engineers at major banks." We talked for 2 hours about technical challenges, market opportunities, and the potential for technology to democratize global finance. Elena was brilliant, experienced, and completely unaware of my connection to the Finance Forward controversy. "I'd love to meet in person," she said finally. "I'm always looking for technical talent, and based on our conversation, you might be exactly what my team needs." I hesitated. Meeting Elena meant risking exposure, but it also meant potentially finding the partner I needed to build Meridian into something real. "I should mention," I said carefully, "I've been involved in some controversial situations recently. My background might complicate any professional relationship." "What kind of controversy?" I gave her the abbreviated version: widow of tech entrepreneur, legal dispute with his family, accusations about my technical competence. I left out the details about Finance Forward and the Whitmore family's media campaign. So you're dealing with people who think women can't code? Elena laughed. Welcome to my entire career. If I avoided working with every brilliant woman who'd been underestimated by idiots, I'd never get anything done. We met the next day at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. Elena was a small woman with fierce eyes and the kind of confidence that comes from surviving Wall Street as a Latina from East LA. She looked at my technical portfolio with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what she was seeing. "This is remarkable work," she said, scrolling through code samples on my laptop. "The efficiency optimizations alone could save financial institutions millions in processing costs. Where did you develop these algorithms?" "I've been working on financial technology platforms for several years. Most recently, I was developing solutions for underbanked populations, but the legal complications made it impossible to continue that work." Elena nodded sympathetically. "Family disputes over intellectual property are brutal. I've seen brilliant people destroyed by relatives who couldn't accept that innovation doesn't always come from where they expect it." She offered me a consulting contract that would pay enough to cover rent and basic expenses while I worked on her remittance platform. More importantly, she offered me access to her network of international investors who were specifically interested in ethical fintech solutions. "There's a conference in Singapore next month," she said. "Global Financial Innovation Summit. Every major player in ethical finance will be there, including several sovereign wealth funds that are looking to invest in platforms serving emerging markets. If you're interested in building something bigger than consulting work, that conference could change your life." Singapore. The other side of the world, where no one knew about the Whitmore family or the finance forward controversy. Where I could present Meridian Financial as a revolutionary new platform without the baggage of my reputation in Chicago. But the conference registration alone cost $5,000, plus travel expenses I couldn't afford and childcare arrangements I couldn't make. "I appreciate the opportunity," I said, "but international travel isn't possible for me right now." Elena studied my face for a moment. "Personal obligations?" "I have a young son. Single mother situation. Bring him." The conference organizers provide childcare for attendees, and Singapore is incredibly family-friendly. As for expenses, I could advance them against future consulting fees if you're willing to present our joint work on remittance optimization. It was an incredible opportunity, but it was also terrifying. Presenting at an international conference meant visibility, scrutiny, questions about my background. If the Whitmore family discovered I was building a competing platform, they could escalate their legal challenges or find new ways to sabotage my work. But staying hidden in Chicago meant staying small, staying poor, staying powerless. If I wanted to build something that could change the world, I had to be willing to step back into the world. "I'll do it," I said. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. I refined the Meridian platform until every algorithm was perfect, every user interface was intuitive, every security protocol was bulletproof. I practiced my presentation until I could deliver it flawlessly while sleep-deprived and stressed. I researched every potential investor who would be at the conference, tailoring my pitch to their specific interests and investment criteria. But I also lived in constant fear that the Whitmore family would discover what I was doing. The fear was justified. 2 days before I was supposed to leave for Singapore, David Kim called with devastating news. "They filed an injunction," he said without preamble. "They're claiming that any new financial technology platform you develop uses proprietary algorithms stolen from Finance Forward. They want a court order preventing you from presenting or licensing any fintech solutions until the ownership dispute is resolved." I felt the world tilt sideways. Can they do that? They can try. The injunction hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. If the judge grants it, you could be legally prohibited from presenting at the conference or pursuing any work in financial technology. What are our chances? David's pause told me everything I needed to know. They have expensive lawyers and a compelling narrative about protecting intellectual property. We have limited resources and a client who's been painted as a potential fraudster in the business press. It's not good, Laura. I hung up and stared at my laptop screen, where months of work on Meridian Financial represented my only hope for financial independence and professional vindication. If the Whitmore family succeeded in getting an injunction, they wouldn't just prevent me from presenting at the conference, they'd effectively end my career in technology. That night, I made a decision that went against every legal and ethical principle I'd been raised with. I decided to present at the conference anyway. If the judge granted the injunction, I'd be in Singapore, outside the jurisdiction of American courts. By the time any legal consequences caught up with me, I'd have had the chance to secure international investors and establish Meridian as a legitimate business entity. It was risky, potentially illegal, and definitely the kind of decision that could destroy what remained of my reputation if it went wrong. But it was also the only chance I had to build something bigger than the Whitmore family's ability to destroy it. I called Elena and told her I was definitely coming to Singapore, but that there might be some last-minute complications with my travel schedule. Legal issues? She asked. Something like that. Laura, I don't know what you're running from, but I've seen your work. Whatever controversy you're involved in, your technical abilities speak for themselves. Don't let other people's limitations define what you're capable of achieving. The injunction hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on Friday. My flight to Singapore left at 6 a.m. the same day. Industry insiders suggest that the late David Whitmore may have been the real architect behind Finance Forward's innovative platform, the article read. Questions remain about whether his widow has the technical background necessary to scale the company's ambitious vision. I read that article 3 times, each reading making me angrier than the last. Everything I'd built, every line of code I'd written, every sleepless night I'd spent solving technical problems, reduced to speculation about whether I was smart enough to have done what I'd obviously done. But the article also included a quote that made my blood run cold. The Whitmore family has always been supportive of David's entrepreneurial interests, said an unnamed family source. However, there are concerns about whether his final business decisions were made with full clarity, given his medical condition. The family remains committed to protecting David's legacy and ensuring that his innovations are developed responsibly. They were positioning themselves to challenge my ownership of the company. I called Sarah immediately. They can't do anything, she assured me. You have legal ownership, clear documentation, and a functioning business that's proving its value every day. They're just trying to scare you. But I knew the Whitmore family better than Sarah did. They didn't make empty threats, and they had resources I was only beginning to understand. The legal challenge came 2 weeks later. Patricia, Richard, and Emma filed a lawsuit claiming that David had been mentally incompetent when he transferred the company to me, that I had exercised undue influence over a dying man, and that the transfer should be voided as part of his estate. They were asking for complete ownership of Finance Forward, plus damages for what they claimed was my fraudulent appropriation of family assets. The lawsuit was accompanied by a media campaign that painted me as a manipulative gold digger who had taken advantage of a vulnerable man in his final days. Suddenly, every tech blog and business publication was running stories about the controversial widow who claimed to have built revolutionary technology but might have stolen it from her dead husband. The narrative was devastating and effective. Potential investors started backing away. Beta test partners began asking uncomfortable questions. Even Sarah, who believed in me completely, had to acknowledge that the controversy was making it impossible to raise the additional funding we needed to scale. We need to fight this, I told her during an emergency meeting in my apartment while Philip napped in his crib. Fighting will take years and cost millions we don't have, Sarah replied. And even if we win, the damage to your reputation might be irreversible. Maybe we should consider settling, giving them some ownership stake in exchange for dropping the lawsuit. Absolutely not. The words came out harder than I'd intended. David gave me this company because he trusted me to build it into something meaningful. I'm not giving his family one share of something they tried to destroy. Sarah looked around my tiny apartment, the Murphy bed, the card table I used as a desk, the second-hand baby furniture, and I could see her calculating the odds of my survival against the Whitmore family's resources. Laura, I believe in you, and I believe in this technology. But belief doesn't pay legal bills or fund product development. You're fighting a war on multiple fronts against people who have unlimited resources and no conscience about using them. She was right, and we both knew it. The Whitmore family wasn't just trying to take my company. They were trying to destroy my credibility so thoroughly that I'd never be able to build anything again. That night, after Sarah left and Philip was asleep, I sat at my card table desk and stared at my laptop screen. The Finance Forward platform was right there, fully functional, ready to change lives. I had beta users sending me messages about how our services had helped them start businesses, buy homes, send their kids to college. I had technology that could democratize financial services for millions of people. But I also had legal bills I couldn't pay, investors who were backing away, and a media narrative that painted me as a fraud. The smart thing would have been to settle. Take whatever deal the Whitmore family offered, walk away with something, and try to rebuild my life without the constant threat of litigation. Instead, I made a decision that everyone told me was insane. I decided to fight them with the one weapon they couldn't take away from me, the technology itself. If they wanted to claim I wasn't smart enough to have built what I'd built, I'd prove them wrong by building something even better. If they wanted to destroy my reputation, I'd build a reputation so solid that their lies couldn't touch it. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one, but I'd fight it on my terms with my weapons in my arena. I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Finance Forward 2.0, Revolutionary Expansion Plan. The Whitmore family thought they were fighting a grieving widow with limited resources and no connections. They were about to discover they were fighting a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. But first, I had to survive long enough to build what I was planning. And that meant making some choices that would test everything I thought I knew about right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, and what I was willing to sacrifice to protect my son's future. The real war was just beginning. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, taped to my door like a scarlet letter. 30 days to vacate for non-payment of rent. I stared at the official document while Philip babbled in his high chair, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother was about to become homeless. The legal bills had consumed everything. Every dollar Sarah and I had raised, every penny of my remaining savings, every cent I could scrape together had gone to fighting the Whitmore family's lawsuit. My lawyer, David Kim, was brilliant and believed in my case, but brilliance doesn't work for free. The retainer alone had cost more than most people make in 6 months. I called Sarah from the community center's payphone because my cell service had been cut off the week before. "We need to talk," I said when she answered. "Laura, I've been trying to reach you. There's been a development." My stomach dropped. Good development or bad development? Meet me at the coffee shop on Ashland in an hour. And Laura? Bring Philip. You're going to want to hear this in person. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 10 in the morning, just a few freelancers with laptops and the kind of people who had nowhere else to be. Sarah was already there when I arrived, and her expression told me everything I needed to know before she said a word. "They made an offer," she said without preamble. I settled Philip in his stroller and sat down across from her. "What kind of offer?" "Complete settlement. They drop the lawsuit, acknowledge your ownership of the company, and provide funding for development." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "What's the catch?" Sarah slid a folder across the table. "They want 60% ownership and complete operational control. You'd remain as a technical consultant with a guaranteed salary, but all business decisions would go through their board of directors." I opened the folder and scanned the terms. The salary they were offering was more money than I'd ever seen in my life, enough to get Philip and me into a real apartment, enough to pay off my legal bills, enough to live comfortably while they turned my technology into their profit machine. It's not a terrible deal, Sarah said carefully. You'd maintain some ownership, you'd be financially secure, and the technology would still get developed. Under their control. Yes. I thought about David's vision for Finance Forward. He'd wanted to democratize financial services, to build something that served people who'd been ignored by traditional banks. The Whitmore family's version would serve their bottom line first and their social conscience never. What happens if I say no? Sarah's expression grew even more serious. They've made it clear this is their final offer. If you reject it, they'll escalate the legal challenge and add additional claims. David Kim thinks they might try to argue that you stole proprietary technology, which could result in criminal charges. Criminal charges. The words hit me like a physical blow. I could handle being poor, I could handle being homeless, but I couldn't handle being separated from Philip. If they managed to get me arrested, even temporarily, what would happen to my son? There's something else, Sarah continued. I've been getting pressure from my own investors. The controversy around Finance Forward is affecting my fund's reputation. My partners are suggesting I distance myself from the situation. I looked at her across the table, this woman who'd believed in me when no one else would, who'd invested her money and reputation in my vision, and realized I was about to lose my only ally. You're pulling out. I don't want to. But I have fiduciary responsibilities to my other portfolio companies. The legal uncertainty around Finance Forward makes it impossible for me to justify continued investment. I sat back in my chair, feeling the walls close in from every direction. No money, no lawyer, no investor, no home. The Whitmore family had systematically eliminated every option except surrender. How long do I have to decide? They want an answer by Friday. 3 days. 3 days to choose between financial security under their control or complete destruction fighting for independence I might never achieve. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes I'd started packing, trying to figure out where Philip and I would go when the eviction became final. I'd called every shelter in the city, but the waiting lists were months long. I'd reached out to old friends, but most of them had their own struggles and couldn't take in a single mother with a baby. I was staring at my laptop, looking at the Finance Forward platform that represented years of work and David's dying wish, when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. Laura Monroe? Yes. This is James Rodriguez from the Chicago Tribune. I'm working on a follow-up story about the Finance Forward controversy, and I wanted to give you a chance to respond to some new allegations. My blood went cold. What allegations? Sources close to the Whitmore family are claiming that you never actually contributed to the technical development of Finance Forward. They're saying that David Whitmore built the entire platform himself, and that you've been fraudulently claiming credit for his work since his death. I closed my eyes and tried to keep my voice steady. That's completely false. I have documentation of my contributions, code repositories with my commits, emails discussing technical decisions. Anyone who actually examines the evidence can see that I was deeply involved in every aspect of the platform's development. The sources also claim that you manipulated David Whitmore during his illness, convincing him to transfer company ownership while he was mentally compromised by medication and treatment. Mr. Rodriguez, David was completely lucid when he made that decision. He transferred the company to me because he trusted me to continue building what we'd started together. His family is spreading these lies because they can't accept that he chose to leave his legacy to someone they disapprove of. Would you be willing to provide documentation to support your claims? I hesitated. Providing documentation meant revealing technical details that could help competitors, legal strategies that could undermine my case, personal communications that were meant to be private. But staying silent meant letting their narrative go unchallenged. I'll consider it, I said finally. The story runs tomorrow morning. I wanted to give you a chance to comment before publication. After he hung up, I sat staring at my phone, knowing that tomorrow would bring another wave of negative publicity that would make my situation even more impossible. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I wasn't going to accept their offer. I wasn't going to let them buy my silence or my technology. I wasn't going to let them rewrite history to make David's widow disappear into a footnote about his unfortunate final decisions. But I also wasn't going to keep fighting their war on their terms. I was going to disappear. Not literally. I couldn't abandon Philip or run away from my responsibilities. But I was going to let Laura Monroe, the controversial widow. I spent Thursday night packing, feeding Philip, and trying not to think about the fact that I was about to become an international fugitive from American civil court proceedings. At 4 a.m. Friday morning, I loaded our suitcases into a taxi and headed for O'Hare Airport. My phone was buzzing with calls from David Kim, but I didn't answer. Whatever the judge decided, I'd deal with the consequences from Singapore. As the plane lifted off from Chicago, I looked down at the city where I'd lost everything and made a promise to myself and to Philip, who was sleeping peacefully in my arms. I was never coming back as the person who'd left. When I returned, it would be as someone the Whitmore family had never imagined I could become. But first, I had to survive a conference where one wrong question, one suspicious investor, one background check could expose everything I was trying to build and destroy the only chance I had left. The real test was just beginning. The Singapore conference was everything Elena had promised and more. The Marina Bay Sands Convention Center buzzed with the energy of people who moved billions of dollars with handshake agreements and changed global markets with PowerPoint presentations. For 3 days, I presented Meridian Financial to rooms full of investors who saw revolutionary technology instead of controversial widow, brilliant innovation instead of legal baggage. The response was extraordinary. Sovereign wealth funds from Norway and Singapore expressed serious interest. A consortium of European banks wanted to discuss licensing agreements. 3 different venture capital firms offered term sheets that would have funded Meridian's development for the next 5 years. For the first time since David's death, I felt like I was winning. That feeling lasted exactly until I checked my email on the final day of the conference. The message was from David Kim, sent 12 hours earlier with the subject line urgent, call immediately. Laura, where are you? The judge granted the injunction and issued a warrant for contempt of court when you failed to appear. The Whitmore family's lawyers are claiming you fled the jurisdiction to avoid legal consequences. They're also alleging that your presentation in Singapore constitutes willful violation of the court order. You need to contact me immediately to discuss damage control. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the rest of my messages. Missed calls from David Kim. Missed calls from unknown numbers. And then, at the bottom of my inbox, an email that made my blood freeze. The sender was Patricia Whitmore. The subject line read, regarding your son. Dear Laura, I hope you're enjoying your international travels. It must be difficult to focus on business presentations while worrying about Philip's well-being. I wanted to assure you that we're prepared to provide him with the stable, loving home environment he deserves while you sort out your legal difficulties. Our family attorneys have prepared guardianship papers that would ensure Philip receives proper care during this challenging period. We look forward to discussing this arrangement when you return to face the consequences of your recent decisions. Warmly, Patricia Whitmore. They were threatening to take my son. I read the email 3 times, each reading making the threat clearer and more terrifying. The Whitmore family wasn't just trying to destroy my business, they were positioning themselves to claim custody of Philip while I dealt with legal consequences they'd engineered. I called David Kim immediately, not caring that it was 3 a.m. in Chicago. Laura, thank God. Where are you? Singapore. What's happening with Philip? Are they actually trying to take custody? They filed preliminary papers claiming that your flight from jurisdiction demonstrates parental unfitness and that Philip would be better served by family members who can provide stability. It's a pressure tactic, but it's also legally viable given the contempt warrant. Can they actually get custody? David's pause was answer enough. If you don't return immediately to address the contempt charges, and if they can demonstrate that you're prioritizing business interests over parental responsibilities, a family court judge might consider temporary guardianship arrangements. I looked across the hotel room where Philip was napping peacefully, completely unaware that his future was being decided by people who'd never shown him an ounce of genuine affection. The same people who'd thrown us out of their house were now claiming they wanted to provide him with a stable home environment. What do I need to do? Come home immediately. Appear before the judge, apologize for the contempt, and hope we can negotiate a resolution that doesn't involve criminal charges or custody modifications. And give up everything I've built here. Laura, you're talking about your son's future. Whatever business opportunities you've developed in Singapore, they're not worth losing Philip. He was right, and I knew it. But I also knew that returning to Chicago meant surrendering to the Whitmore family's strategy of systematic destruction. They'd engineered this crisis specifically to force me into an impossible choice between my son's immediate safety and our long-term future. I need 24 hours to wrap things up here, I said. You don't have 24 hours. Every day you stay away makes the custody situation worse. After I hung up, I sat in the hotel room staring at my laptop screen, where the Meridian financial presentation was still open. 3 years of work, months of preparation, the best opportunity I'd ever had to build something meaningful, all about to be sacrificed because the Whitmore family had found the one threat I couldn't ignore. That's when Elena knocked on my door. I've been trying to reach you, she said when I let her in. The Norwegian fund wants to fast-track their investment decision. They're prepared to offer $50 million in series of funding with a valuation that would make you one of the youngest female tech billionaires in history. $50 million. Enough to fight any legal battle, hire the best lawyers, ensure Philip's future regardless of what the Whitmore family tried to do. There's a complication, I said, and explained the situation in Chicago. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. They're using your child as leverage to destroy your business, she said finally. That's not a legal strategy, that's extortion. Legal or not, it's effective. I have to go back. What if you didn't? I stared at her. What do you mean? Singapore has very specific laws about international custody disputes. If you established residency here and filed for protection under their family court system, the American courts would have limited jurisdiction. You could fight the custody battle from a position of strength instead of desperation. That would mean staying here indefinitely. Building a life in a country where I don't know anyone, don't understand the legal system, don't have any support network. You'd have me. You'd have the investors who believe in your work. You'd have the resources to hire the best international family law attorneys money can buy. It was tempting in a way that terrified me. The chance to escape the Whitmore family's reach entirely, to build Meridian without their interference, to raise Philip in a place where my past couldn't follow us. But it would also mean admitting defeat in the country where David had died, where his legacy was being rewritten by people who'd never understood what he was trying to build. I can't run away, I said finally. If I don't face this now, they'll always have power over me. Philip will grow up knowing his mother was a fugitive who chose business success over fighting for what was right. Elena nodded slowly. Then we need to make sure you're fighting from a position of strength. She opened her laptop and started typing. I'm going to make some calls. The Norwegian fund, the Singapore consortium, the European banks, they're all going to receive contracts tonight offering them equity stakes in Meridian Financial. By the time you land in Chicago, you'll have binding investment agreements worth over $200 million. Elena, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Because what the Whitmore family is doing isn't just an attack on you. It's an attack on every woman who's ever been told she's not smart enough, not qualified enough, not worthy enough to build something revolutionary. She looked up from her laptop with fierce determination. You're going back to Chicago, but you're not going back as the broke widow they've been bullying. You're going back as the CEO of a company worth more than their entire family fortune. What if the investments fall through? What if the legal situation makes them reconsider? Then we'll find other investors. But Laura, you need to understand something. The technology you've built is genuinely revolutionary. The algorithms, the user interface, the security protocols, this isn't just a good business idea. This is the kind of innovation that changes entire industries. She turned her laptop screen toward me, showing a financial projection that made my head spin. Meridian Financial isn't just going to compete with traditional banks. It's going to replace them. And the people trying to destroy you have no idea what they're actually fighting. I spent that night in Singapore making the hardest decision of my life. I could stay and build an empire in safety, or return and fight for the right to build that empire where it belonged. By morning, I'd chosen to fight. But I was returning to Chicago with something the Whitmore family had never expected me to acquire: the resources to fight back, the international credibility to challenge their narrative, and the financial backing to turn their legal strategy against them. The flight home was the longest 12 hours of my life. Philip slept peacefully while I reviewed legal documents, investment contracts, and strategic plans that would either save us or destroy us completely. When we landed at O'Hare, I had 17 missed calls from David Kim and a text message that made my heart stop. Emergency custody hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. Whitmore family claims you've abandoned Philip by fleeing to Singapore. Judge is considering immediate temporary guardianship pending your return. Come directly to my office. David. I looked down at Philip, who was smiling up at me with complete trust that his mother would protect him from anything. The Whitmore family thought they'd cornered me into surrender. They were about to discover they'd cornered a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. But first, I had to survive a custody hearing where they'd try to prove I was an unfit mother who'd chosen business opportunities over my son's well-being. The irony was devastating. I'd spent 3 years building something that could secure Philip's future, and now that work was being used as evidence that I didn't deserve to be his mother. The real war was about to begin, and this time, the battlefield was my son's future. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. in a windowless courtroom that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat at a scarred wooden table with David Kim, watching the Whitmore family's legal team arrange their files with the precision of people who'd done this before. Patricia Whitmore sat in the front row wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my rent, her expression a perfect mask of concerned grandmother. Richard flanked her right side, checking his phone with the casual indifference of someone attending a minor business meeting. Emma sat to Patricia's left, occasionally glancing at me with what looked like genuine pity. They'd brought character witnesses. David's college roommate, who testified about how devoted David had been to his family. The family's longtime housekeeper, who described how overwhelmed I'd seemed during David's illness. A child psychologist who'd never met Philip but was prepared to discuss the developmental risks of unstable living situations. I had David Kim and a folder of investment contracts that proved I was building a successful business, not abandoning my responsibilities. It wasn't enough. Judge Margaret Meshock listened to 3 hours of testimony about my pattern of irresponsible behavior, my flight from legal obligations, and my prioritization of business interests over parental duties. The Whitmore family's lawyer painted a picture of a young mother so desperate for financial success that she'd risk her son's well-being by fleeing the country during active legal proceedings. Your Honor, their attorney concluded, the respondent's recent actions demonstrate a clear disregard for both legal authority and parental responsibility. The petitioners are prepared to provide Master Philip with the stable, loving environment he deserves while his mother addresses her legal and financial difficulties. When it was my turn to respond, I stood up knowing that everything I said would either save my son or lose him forever. Your Honor, I didn't flee the country to avoid responsibility. I traveled to Singapore to secure the financial resources necessary to provide for my son's future. The investment agreements I've obtained will ensure Philip has educational opportunities, healthcare, and financial security that I couldn't provide otherwise. Judge Meshock looked at the contracts David Kim had submitted. Ms. Monroe, these appear to be preliminary agreements contingent on various conditions. They don't represent actual funding, and they certainly don't justify contempt of court. I understand that, Your Honor. But they represent my commitment to building something meaningful for my son, not abandoning him for personal gain. The court is concerned about your decision-making process, Ms. Monroe. You chose to leave the jurisdiction during active legal proceedings, knowing that your absence could affect custody arrangements. That suggests a troubling pattern of prioritizing business opportunities over legal and parental obligations. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. Every word I said seemed to make things worse. Every explanation sounded like an excuse. Your Honor, I'm a single mother trying to build a future for my son. The Whitmore family has systematically tried to destroy my ability to earn a living, and when I found an opportunity to secure our financial future, I took it. That doesn't make me an unfit mother. It makes me a mother who's willing to fight for her child's well-being. Judge Meshock's expression didn't change. The court will take a 30-minute recess to consider the evidence. Those 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. I sat in the hallway holding Philip, who was babbling happily and playing with my necklace, completely unaware that his future was being decided by strangers. David Kim tried to prepare me for different scenarios, but his tone told me everything I needed to know. We were losing. When court reconvened, Judge Meshock's words confirmed my worst fears. The court finds that while Ms. Monroe's intentions may be well-meaning, her recent actions demonstrate questionable judgment regarding her son's best interests. The court is granting temporary guardianship to the petitioners pending resolution of the underlying legal disputes and Ms. Monroe's compliance with outstanding court orders. The words hit me like physical blows. Temporary guardianship. Outstanding court orders. Pending resolution. Ms. Monroe will be granted supervised visitation twice weekly, and the arrangement will be reviewed in 60 days. The petitioners are directed to ensure that Master Philip maintains contact with his mother, and that his emotional well-being remains the priority. I heard the judge's words, but they seemed to be coming from very far away. Patricia Whitmore was already standing, reaching for Philip with the satisfied expression of someone whose careful planning had paid off exactly as expected. No, I said, pulling Philip closer. You can't do this. Ms. Monroe, Judge Meshock said firmly, you need to comply with the court's order. They don't love him, I said, my voice breaking. They're doing this to hurt me, not to help him. They threw us out of their house when he was 3 months old. They called me a gold digger and said I trapped their son. Now they want to raise his child. Ms. Monroe, you need to transfer custody to the petitioners immediately, or I'll hold you in contempt. David Kim put his hand on my arm. Laura, you have to let them take him. Fighting this now will only make things worse. I looked down at Philip, who was looking up at me with David's eyes and my stubborn chin. He reached up and touched my face with his tiny hand, and I realized this might be the last time I held him for weeks. I love you, I whispered to him. Mommy loves you so much, and I'm going to fix this. I promise I'm going to fix this. Patricia Whitmore approached with a social worker who specialized in custody transitions. They were gentle but firm, explaining that Philip would be well cared for and that I'd see him again soon. As they lifted him from my arms, Philip started crying. Not the angry cry of a hungry or tired baby, but the heartbroken wail of a child who knows something terrible is happening but doesn't understand what. I watched them carry my son out of the courtroom, and something inside me broke in a way I didn't know was possible. The next few weeks were a blur of supervised visits in sterile rooms, legal meetings that accomplished nothing, and nights spent staring at the ceiling of my empty apartment. The Whitmore family had moved Philip into their mansion, hired a full-time nanny, and begun what they called providing stability and what I recognized as systematic replacement of his mother. During my twice-weekly visits, Philip seemed confused about why I kept leaving. The social worker assured me this was normal, that children adapted quickly to new routines, but I could see him starting to look for Patricia when he was upset instead of reaching for me. They were erasing me from his life with the efficiency of people who'd planned this outcome from the beginning. The business opportunities in Singapore evaporated as news of the custody battle spread through the international investment community. Elena tried to maintain support, but her own investors were nervous about backing a company whose CEO was involved in complex family legal issues. The Norwegian fund withdrew their offer. The European banks requested clarification of the legal situation before proceeding. Within a month, I'd lost my son, my business prospects, and any hope of financial independence. But the worst part wasn't the loss of money or opportunity. The worst part was watching Philip adapt to life without me. During one supervised visit, he fell and scraped his knee. Instead of running to me for comfort, he looked around for Patricia. When I tried to pick him up, he pushed me away and cried for Gamma, his new name for the woman who was systematically replacing me in his affections. It's normal, the social worker assured me afterward. Children form attachments to their primary caregivers. It doesn't mean he loves you less. But it felt like losing him all over again, every single day. The legal bills consumed what little money I had left. David Kim was working for reduced fees, but even reduced fees for a custody battle against unlimited resources were more than I could afford. I moved to an even smaller apartment, sold everything I owned except my laptop, and took a job doing basic web development for a small marketing company. The work was mind-numbing after years of building revolutionary financial platforms, but it paid enough to cover rent and legal fees. Barely. 3 months after losing custody, I was sitting in my apartment eating ramen noodles and reviewing legal documents when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. Laura Monroe? Yes. This is Rebecca Martinez from the Wall Street Journal. I'm working on a story about the Finance Forward legal dispute, and I wanted to ask you about some new developments. My stomach dropped. What developments? The Whitmore family has announced plans to launch a new financial services platform based on technology they claim was developed by David Whitmore before his death. They're calling it Whitmore Financial Solutions, and they're positioning it as David's legacy project that will serve underbanked communities. They were stealing my work. Not just claiming ownership of Finance Forward, but actively building a business based on technology I developed, using David's name to legitimize what they were taking from me. The platform appears to be remarkably similar to the Finance Forward technology you've claimed credit for developing, the reporter continued. The Whitmore family says this proves that David was the real architect behind the innovation, and that your claims of technical contribution were exaggerated. I hung up without responding and immediately called David Kim. They can't do this, I said when he answered. They can't just steal my technology and rebrand it as David's legacy project. Actually, they can, David said grimly. The ownership dispute is still unresolved, and they're arguing that any technology developed during David's lifetime belongs to his estate. Since they control the estate, they can license or develop that technology however they choose. But I have proof that I developed those algorithms. I have code repositories, email chains, documentation of my contributions, which they're claiming were created after David's death to support fraudulent ownership claims. Laura, they've been planning this for months. Every move they've made, the custody battle, the media campaign, the legal challenges, has been designed to position them to take control of the technology while destroying your credibility. I sat in my empty apartment, staring at my laptop where years of work had been reduced to files they were claiming I'd stolen from my dead husband. They hadn't just taken my son and my business prospects. They'd taken my identity as an innovator, my reputation as a technologist, my entire professional existence. But as I sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I'd tried to build, I realized something that changed everything. They'd made one crucial mistake. They thought they'd taken everything from me, but they'd left me with the one thing they couldn't steal, couldn't control, and couldn't destroy. They'd left me with nothing to lose. And a woman with nothing to lose is the most dangerous opponent they could have created. The real fight was about to begin. The breaking point came during a supervised visit 6 months after losing custody. I was sitting in the sterile family services office, watching Philip play with blocks while a social worker documented our interaction quality, when he looked up at me with David's eyes and said his first clear sentence. "When Gamma coming?" He wasn't asking when Patricia was coming to pick him up. He was asking when his real caregiver, the woman he now considered his primary parent, would rescue him from this confusing hour with the stranger who claimed to love him. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried until I couldn't breathe. When I returned, Philip had lost interest in the blocks and was staring out the window with the patient expression of a child waiting for something unpleasant to end. The social worker made notes about decreased engagement and possible attachment disruption. That night, I sat in my apartment with a bottle of wine I couldn't afford and David's laptop, which I'd managed to keep through all the legal battles. I opened the folder where I'd saved every photo of Philip from birth to the custody hearing, and I made a decision that terrified me. I was going to stop fighting for the life they'd taken from me and start building a life they couldn't touch. The next morning, I called David Kim and told him I wanted to negotiate a settlement. "What kind of settlement?" he asked, clearly surprised. "Complete surrender. They can have finance forward, they can have the technology, they can have the narrative about David being the real innovator. I'll sign whatever they want me to sign." "Laura, that's not." "In exchange, I want guaranteed visitation rights that can't be modified without cause, and I want them to stop the media campaign. No more interviews about the gold digger who stole their son's legacy. No more anonymous sources questioning my technical abilities. They get everything they want, and I get to disappear." David was quiet for a long moment. "What aren't you telling me?" "I'm tired of fighting a war I can't win. They have unlimited resources, unlimited time, and unlimited willingness to destroy me. I have a part-time web development job and a son who doesn't remember that I used to be his whole world." "So you're giving up?" "I'm choosing my battles." The settlement negotiations took 3 weeks. The Whitmore family's lawyers were suspicious of my sudden willingness to surrender, but they couldn't resist the opportunity to claim total victory. I signed papers acknowledging that David had been the primary architect of Finance Forward's technology, that my contributions had been supportive rather than foundational, and that I had no legitimate claim to ownership of the platform or its underlying innovations. In exchange, I got supervised visitation twice a week that couldn't be reduced without court approval, and a confidentiality agreement that prevented either side from discussing the case publicly. The day I signed those papers, I felt like I was signing my own death certificate. Everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for, everything that proved I was more than the gold digger they'd painted me as, gone. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in months: freedom. That evening, I opened a new document on my laptop and started typing. Project Phoenix, revolutionary financial platform for global markets. If they wanted to steal my past, I'd build a future they couldn't touch. The new platform was everything Meridian Financial could have been, but designed from the ground up to be legally bulletproof. Instead of focusing on underbanked Americans, Phoenix would serve emerging markets in Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, regions where the Whitmore family had no presence and no legal reach. Instead of traditional venture capital funding, I'd bootstrap the development using freelance income and build partnerships with international development organizations that cared more about social impact than Silicon Valley credentials. Instead of fighting for recognition in a tech industry that had already decided I was a fraud, I'd build something so successful that recognition would be irrelevant. But building a global financial platform while working part-time web development jobs and maintaining supervised visitation schedules required resources I didn't have and expertise I couldn't afford. That's when I met Dr. Amara Okafor. Amara was a Nigerian fintech entrepreneur who'd built one of Africa's most successful mobile banking platforms before selling it to a European consortium. She was in Chicago for a Northwestern Business School speaking engagement, and I'd managed to get a ticket using my alumni discount. Her presentation about financial inclusion in emerging markets was everything I dreamed of building with Finance Forward, but executed at a scale that made my original vision look small. During the Q&A session, I asked a technical question about cross-border transaction processing that revealed I understood the underlying challenges better than most of the MBA students in the audience. After her talk, Amara approached me. "Your question about distributed ledger optimization was remarkably sophisticated," she said. "Are you working in fintech?" I was. "Now I'm between projects." "What kind of projects?" I gave her the carefully edited version. Financial services for underserved populations, legal complications with former business partners, currently exploring opportunities in international markets. "Would you be interested in consulting work?" "I'm building a new platform for cross-border remittances, and I need someone who understands both the technical challenges and the regulatory complexities." The consulting work started small: algorithm optimization, user interface design, security protocol development. But Amara quickly realized that I wasn't just a competent contractor. I was someone who understood financial technology at a level that most engineers never reached. "Where did you learn to code like this?" she asked during one of our video calls, reviewing a solution I developed for real-time fraud detection. "Self-taught mostly. I've been working on financial platforms for several years." "This isn't self-taught work. This is PhD-level algorithm development. You're solving problems that teams of engineers at major banks haven't figured out." Over the next few months, our working relationship evolved into something deeper. Amara was building a consortium of African fintech companies that could compete with traditional banking systems, and she wanted me to lead the technical development. "I can offer you equity, a leadership role, and the chance to build something that could serve hundreds of millions of people," she said during a call that changed my life. "But it would mean relocating to Lagos and committing to a project that could take years to fully develop." Lagos. The other side of the world from Chicago, from the Whitmore family, from the supervised visitation schedule that was slowly killing my relationship with my son. "I have personal obligations here," I said carefully. "Family?" "My son. I'm involved in a custody situation that makes international relocation complicated." Amara was quiet for a moment. "How complicated?" I told her the truth. All of it. The custody battle, the legal settlement, the supervised visits where Philip increasingly treated me like a stranger. The way the Whitmore family had systematically destroyed my reputation while stealing my work. "They took your child and your technology," Amara said when I finished. "And now they're using both to ensure you can never challenge them again." That's about the size of it. What if there was another way? "What do you mean?" "What if you could build something so successful, so undeniably revolutionary, that it gave you the resources to fight back? Not just for your business, but for your son. From Lagos. From wherever you need to be. Lara, the platform you've designed for Phoenix could generate billions in revenue within 5 years. Billions. That's not just financial independence. That's the kind of wealth that makes legal battles irrelevant." She was right, and I knew it. But accepting her offer meant leaving Chicago, leaving my twice-weekly visits with Philip, leaving any hope of rebuilding our relationship while he was still young enough to remember me as his mother. "I need time to think about it," I said. "Of course. But Lara, you should know, I've worked with hundreds of engineers, dozens of entrepreneurs, some of the most brilliant minds in global finance. What you've built is extraordinary. Don't let other people's limitations define what you're capable of achieving." That night, I sat in my apartment looking at photos of Philip and trying to make an impossible choice. Stay in Chicago and watch my son forget me while I built a small, safe life that would never threaten the people who destroyed me. Or leave everything behind to build something revolutionary that could give me the power to reclaim what they'd taken, but might cost me the last connection I had to my child. The choice felt like choosing between my heart and my future, between love and justice, between the mother I was and the woman I could become. But as I sat there in the darkness, I realized that staying wasn't really preserving my relationship with Philip. It was just prolonging the slow death of that relationship while ensuring I'd never have the resources to fight for something better. If I stayed, I'd watch him grow up calling Patricia Gamma while I remained the stranger who visited twice a week. I'd build a small life that kept me close but powerless, loving but irrelevant. If I left, I'd lose him in the short term, but gain the possibility of winning him back with the kind of success that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but it was also the clearest. I called Amara the next morning. "I'm in," I said. "When do we start?" The transformation had begun. 3 years later, I stood in the lobby of the Four Seasons Lagos, watching CNN International report on Phoenix Financial's IPO launch. The ticker at the bottom of the screen showed our stock price climbing past projections that had seemed impossible when I'd first pitched the platform to Amara's consortium. Phoenix Financial debuts at $847 per share, making founder Laura Monroe one of the youngest self-made billionaires in history, the anchor announced. The platform, which provides financial services to over 200 million users across emerging markets, has revolutionized banking access in regions traditionally underserved by major financial institutions. My phone buzzed with congratulations from investors, partners, and journalists who wanted interviews with the woman who'd built a trillion-dollar company from a one-room apartment in Chicago. Forbes had called that morning to confirm details for their cover story. The Wall Street Journal wanted to discuss my unprecedented rise in global fintech. But the call I'd been waiting for came from David Kim. "Laura, you need to see the news from Chicago," he said without preamble. I switched to a local Chicago news feed and watched a story that made my heart race with vindication and terror. Whitmore Financial Solutions, the company launched by the prominent Whitmore banking family, has filed for bankruptcy following revelations of massive fraud and embezzlement, the reporter announced. Federal investigators have uncovered evidence that company executives systematically stole investor funds while claiming to develop revolutionary financial technology that industry experts now say never actually existed. The camera cut to footage of FBI agents carrying boxes out of the Whitmore mansion. Patricia Whitmore was being led away in handcuffs, her perfectly composed expression finally cracking under the weight of federal charges. Richard followed in a separate car, his phone pressed to his ear as he tried to manage a crisis that had spiraled beyond his control. The investigation began when international investors questioned discrepancies between Whitmore Financial's claimed technological capabilities and their actual platform performance, the reporter continued. Sources close to the investigation suggest that the company was essentially a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using new investor funds to pay returns to earlier investors while claiming to possess proprietary technology that could revolutionize financial services. Emma Whitmore appeared on screen, flanked by lawyers and looking like she'd aged a decade in the past year. "My family believed we were developing legitimate financial technology based on innovations created by my late brother," she said in a prepared statement. "We had no knowledge of any fraudulent activities, and we're cooperating fully with federal investigators." But the most devastating revelation came at the end of the report. Perhaps most damaging to the family's claims, the reporter concluded, investigators have discovered that the technology Whitmore Financial claimed to possess was actually developed by David Whitmore's widow, Laura Monroe, who has since built Phoenix Financial into one of the world's most successful fintech companies. Court documents from the family's legal dispute with Monroe show that she was the primary architect of the innovations they claimed as their own. I sat in my Lagos hotel room, watching the systematic destruction of the people who'd tried to destroy me, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just profound sadness for the waste of it all. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized but hadn't seen in 3 years. Ms. Monroe? This is Judge Margaret Meshock from Cook County Family Court. I'm calling regarding the custody arrangement for your son Philip. My heart stopped. Is he okay? Philip is physically fine, but his current guardians are facing federal charges that make their custody arrangement untenable. The state is prepared to return full custody to you immediately, pending your availability to resume parental responsibilities. I'll be on the next flight to Chicago. Ms. Monroe, there's something else you should know. Philip has been asking about you. According to his caseworker, he's been telling people that his real mommy is coming back to get him. He's never stopped believing you'd return. I hung up and immediately called my assistant to arrange emergency travel. As I packed, I tried to prepare myself for seeing Philip after 3 years of separation, 3 years during which he'd grown from a toddler into a little boy who might not even remember me clearly. But I also called Amara to discuss something I'd been planning for months. It's time, I said when she answered. The Chicago acquisition? Everything. The foundation, the scholarship program, the technology transfer initiative. I want it all operational before I land in Chicago. Laura, are you sure about this? You could just take Philip and disappear. Build a quiet life somewhere they can't touch you. I'm not running anymore. And I'm not hiding what I've built. The flight to Chicago was the longest 12 hours of my life. I spent the time reviewing legal documents, financial projections, and a plan I'd been developing since the day I'd signed that settlement agreement. When I landed at O'Hare, David Kim was waiting with news that changed everything. The federal investigation has uncovered something extraordinary, he said as we drove toward the Family Services office. The Whitmore family didn't just steal your technology. They've been systematically defrauding investors for over 2 years, claiming to possess innovations they never had. The FBI estimates they stole over $300 million. What does that mean for the custody situation? It means the court is prepared to not only restore your custody, but to issue a formal apology for the original ruling. Judge Meshock has reviewed the evidence and concluded that the custody challenge was part of a broader pattern of fraudulent behavior designed to silence you and steal your work. We pulled up to the Family Services building where I'd lost Philip 3 years earlier. This time, I wasn't walking in as a desperate mother with limited resources and questionable legal standing. I was walking in as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world, with the resources to ensure my son's future and the legal vindication to prove I'd been right all along. But none of that mattered as much as the moment I saw Philip. He was sitting in the same sterile waiting room where I'd last held him, but he was no longer the confused toddler who'd cried when strangers took him away. He was a 6-year-old boy with David's eyes and my stubborn chin, and when he saw me, his face lit up with recognition and joy. "Mommy," he shouted, running across the room and launching himself into my arms. "I knew you'd come back. I told everyone you'd come back." I held him and cried tears I'd been holding back for 3 years, feeling his solid weight against my chest and breathing in the scent of his hair. He was bigger, older, changed by the years we'd lost, but he was still my son. "I'm sorry I was gone so long," I whispered into his ear. "But I'm never leaving you again." "I know," he said with the absolute confidence of a child who'd never doubted his mother's love. "Gamma said you didn't want me anymore, but I knew that wasn't true. Mommies don't stop wanting their babies." The custody transfer was completed in less than an hour. Judge Meshock personally apologized for the court's role in separating us and assured me that the original ruling would be expunged from all records. As we left the building, Philip holding my hand and chattering about everything he wanted to show me. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Whitmore. "We need to talk." I looked at the message and made a decision that surprised even me. I texted back, "Whitmore Mansion. 1 hour. Come alone." It was time to finish what they'd started 3 years ago. But this time, I'd be the one setting the terms. The woman who walked into that mansion wasn't the broken widow they'd thrown out. She was someone they'd never imagined I could become. And she had an offer they couldn't refuse. The Whitmore Mansion looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was perspective. When you've built something worth billions, other people's displays of wealth lose their intimidating power. Or maybe it was just that the house felt empty now, stripped of the arrogance that had once made its marble halls echo with superiority. Patricia Whitmore met me at the front door herself. No housekeeper, no staff, just a woman in her 60s wearing a simple black dress instead of her usual designer armor. The federal charges had aged her dramatically. Her perfectly styled hair was now gray at the roots, and her hands shook slightly as she gestured for me to come inside. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice lacking the commanding tone I remembered. Philip stayed close to my side as we walked through the foyer where I'd once been told I didn't belong. He was looking around with curiosity rather than recognition. This house had never been his home, just a place where he'd been kept while his real life waited for him. "Can we go to my room?" he asked, tugging on my hand. "I want to show you the pictures I drew of you." "In a few minutes, sweetheart. Mommy needs to talk to Mrs. Whitmore first." Patricia led us to the same living room where she'd once outlined my situation with legal documents and cold satisfaction. Now she sat across from me with the defeated posture of someone who'd lost everything and knew it. "I suppose you've come to gloat," she said. "Actually, I came to make you an offer." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "What kind of offer?" I pulled out a folder of documents I'd prepared during the flight from Lagos. Phoenix Financial is launching a new initiative, the David Whitmore Foundation for Financial Innovation. It will provide microloans, financial literacy programs, and technology access to underserved communities across the United States. Patricia stared at the papers without touching them. "You're naming it after David?" David believed technology could democratize financial services and create opportunities for people who'd been systematically excluded from traditional banking. The foundation will fulfill that vision on a scale he never could have imagined. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm offering you a position on the board of directors." The silence in the room was absolute. Patricia looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "You want me to work for you?" "I want you to help me honor your son's memory by building something that actually serves the communities he cared about. The foundation will have an annual budget of $50 million and the potential to help millions of people access financial services for the first time." Patricia's hands were shaking more noticeably now. "After everything we did to you, you're offering me a chance to be part of David's legacy?" "I'm offering you a chance to choose who you want to be going forward. The woman who tried to destroy her son's widow, or the woman who helped build something meaningful from the wreckage of her family's mistakes. The federal charges will be resolved. I've spoken with the prosecutors. If you cooperate fully with their investigation and make restitution to the investors who were defrauded, they're prepared to recommend reduced sentences. Richard and Emma will face consequences for their actions, but you have the opportunity to rebuild your life around something positive." Patricia finally picked up the documents and read through them with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust legal language. When she finished, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Why would you do this? After everything we put you through, why would you offer me redemption?" I thought about the question for a moment, watching Philip explore the room where he'd once lived but never belonged. "Because holding on to anger would make me like you used to be. And because David would have wanted his family to be part of building something good from all this pain. I don't deserve this kindness." "Probably not. But Philip deserves to grow up knowing that his father's family chose love over hatred, even if it took them a while to get there." Patricia signed the documents with hands that shook from emotion rather than fear. As she wrote her name, I saw something I'd never seen before, genuine remorse, and maybe the beginning of the person she could have been if pride and prejudice hadn't consumed her. There's one more thing, I said as she finished signing. Philip will be starting at a new school next month, the University of Chicago Laboratory Schools. It's where David went as a child, and I think he'd like knowing his son is walking the same halls. You're staying in Chicago? Phoenix Financial is opening a North American headquarters here. I'll be splitting my time between Chicago and Lagos, but Philip will grow up in the city where his father lived and dreamed. As we prepared to leave, Patricia walked us to the door with the careful movements of someone still adjusting to a world where she wasn't in control. Laura, she said as I buckled Philip into his car seat. I owe you an apology that's 3 years overdue. We were wrong about you. About everything. I know. David would be proud of what you've built. And he'd be proud of the mother you've become. I looked at her standing in the doorway of the mansion that had once represented everything I couldn't have, everything I wasn't worthy of. Now it just looked like a house where sad people had made terrible choices. He'd be proud of all of us for choosing to build something better, I said. The drive to our new home took us through the neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past the Northwestern campus where David and I had met, through the financial district where Phoenix Financial's new offices would soon employ hundreds of people working to democratize access to financial services. Philip chattered excitedly about starting school, about the friends he'd make, about the room I'd prepared for him in our new house. He was resilient in the way children are, ready to embrace a future that held promise instead of dwelling on a past that had held pain. Mommy, he said as we pulled into our driveway, are we rich now? I laughed at his directness. We're comfortable, sweetheart. But more importantly, we're together. Good. Can we get a dog? We can definitely get a dog. That evening, after Philip was asleep in his new room surrounded by toys and books and pictures of his father, I sat in my home office reviewing the day's developments. Phoenix Financial stock had closed up another 12%. The David Whitmore Foundation had received its first major donation from an anonymous benefactor who turned out to be Elena Vasquez, my former partner who'd built her own successful fintech company. 3 major universities had reached out about establishing scholarship programs for underrepresented students pursuing careers in financial technology. But the most meaningful message was a text from Dr. Sarah Meshach, my first investor who'd believed in me when no one else would. Saw the news about Phoenix and the foundation. David would be so proud. You didn't just build a company, you built a legacy that will change millions of lives. Can't wait to see what you do next. What I did next was walk upstairs to check on Philip one more time. He was sleeping peacefully, clutching a stuffed elephant I'd brought him from Lagos, his face relaxed in the way that only comes with complete security. I stood in his doorway thinking about the journey that had brought us here. The grief and loss, the betrayal and legal battles, the years of separation, and the slow rebuilding of trust. The woman who'd walked out of the city with nothing but a suitcase and a promise to her dead husband had returned as someone who could reshape entire industries. But the real victory wasn't the money or the recognition or even the vindication. The real victory was Philip sleeping safely in his own room, knowing his mother would be there when he woke up, knowing he was loved unconditionally and protected completely. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from Amara in Lagos. The African Development Bank wants to discuss a partnership that could bring Phoenix services to 500 million additional users. Also, there's a young woman here who's built some remarkable algorithms for cryptocurrency optimization. Reminds me of someone I used to know. Think you might be interested in mentoring the next generation of financial revolutionaries. I smiled and typed back, always. Send me her information. And Amara? Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. That's what partners do. See you next week for the board meeting. And Laura? Bring Philip. It's time he saw the empire his mother built. I put my phone away and walked to the window overlooking the city where I'd lost everything and found myself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something meaningful from the foundation of pain and perseverance. But tonight, I was just a mother whose son was safe, whose future was secure, and whose past had finally been transformed into something beautiful. The gold digger they'd tried to destroy had become the woman who would change the world. And this was only the beginning. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this journey as much as I did living it. If this story moved you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what part resonated most with you. Are you dealing with people who underestimate you? Have you ever had to choose between safety and dreams? I read every comment and I love hearing your stories. Don't forget to subscribe because I've got more stories coming that will show you what's possible when you refuse to let other people define your worth. Next week, I'm sharing the story of how I met the woman who would become my business partner, my best friend, and the person who taught me that success shared is success multiplied. Until then, remember, they can take your money, they can take your reputation, they can even take your children temporarily. But they can never take your mind, your skills, or your determination to build something better. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming so successful that their opinions become irrelevant. See you next time.